Good morning and welcome. We're delighted to bring you this expert session this morning on tackling the UK skills shortage. I'm Catherine Mitchell. I'm a partner in HCR's Employment and Immigration team, and I'm joined by a fantastic panel who are all too familiar with the issue of skills shortages. It's a subject that our clients have been talking to us about frequently, so we've crunched the data and we've asked for a range of client views on the current skills shortage. And the result is our report, Tackling the UK Skills Shortage, What, Why and How, which I'm sure many of you have read. The world of work has undergone some seismic change over the last few years, and many of the developments we've seen have opened up whole new possibilities for organising workplaces, as well as enabling us to navigate the immediate shocks of COVID, Brexit and the cost of living crisis, to name but three of the threats. And our expert panel this morning is going to help us explore what's driving the skills shortage, what are its implications for the UK, and what creative solutions that are available that will help you fill those gaps. So without further ado, our panel are going to introduce themselves. So can I turn to you, Oliver?
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Catherine. Yes, my name is Oliver Weiss. Like Catherine, I'm a partner in the HCR employment team. So in my day-to-day, I help employers with difficult employees, and I dare say to redress that balance occasionally, I also assist employees with difficult employers. But we go on what I call sort of a journey with our clients, certainly employer clients, and over the years we've helped our clients with things like flexible working and dealing with employees that join and leave again quite shortly. So these are all things that touch upon the subject matter that we're discussing today. So delighted to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, Oliver. And Adam, can I invite you to introduce yourself, coming from a slightly different perspective from employment law?
Yes, absolutely. My name's Adam Clements. I'm Managing Director here at Freshminds. We are a boutique recruitment and research organisation focused on the consulting sector rather than the legal one. We help our clients find permanent hires with a consulting skill set. We also help provide short-term analytical and consulting firepower to clients to help them deal with talent shortages often. And we also have a research practice that studies some of these areas and others from a research perspective on behalf of clients too. So hopefully a few useful things to add along the way.
Great, thank you. And last but by no means least, of course, Lynn, can I invite you to tell us about yourself?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Catherine. Good morning, everyone. I'm Lynn Adams, and whilst I've been an employment lawyer since 2006, I've been advising on business immigration issues since 2012, with my main role now as head of immigration across the firm's offices. My niche area is actually advising companies who wish to recruit non-UK nationals to work for them within the UK. So very, very relevant for today's talk. But as a team, we do also advise on individual visa applications as well.
Great, thank you very much. So perhaps we can start with some highlights from our report, what are the issues that employers across the country are facing at the moment? And I think a thundering finding of our report was that this is affecting not only all sectors, but all sizes of organisations. So 68% of SMEs and 86% of large organisations are facing skills shortages. And we're still way off pre-pandemic levels in terms of numbers of vacancies. So at the moment, we've got around 304,000 more vacancies in Q1 this year, as compared to the same time 4 years ago. And the economy, as we know, is in trouble already. And some parts of this doesn't make for uplifting reading about the future. And estimates are that by 2030, we're going to need an additional 3.1 million intermediate workers compared to 2.5 million high-skilled workers. Forecasts are showing a reduced economic output of around 120 billion if we can't do something about these skills shortages. And very worryingly, youth unemployment is higher in the UK than in comparable global economies. And I know there are people on this session this morning from further education, and I'm sure they would point to how that sector has struggled for generations with funding and status. And I know that this morning we'll be talking about technical education and the part that plays. So our clients have been telling us what this means in practice for them on the ground. And the sorts of comments that we're getting from the businesses we work for. As you'll see, we're finding it really challenging to compete, to attract the people with the skills. And one client telling us that they've experienced a skills shortage for at least 5 years, probably longer. And more people who in the past have been able to do their own recruitment and fill vacancies relatively easily are going and doing lots of different things and using recruitment agencies, which they've avoided in the past. So I think 3 themes have emerged from our report in terms of possible routes to help businesses tackle the skills shortage. And the first one of those is loosely grouped around creating a really competitive employment proposition. So becoming an employer of choice is not something that a business can achieve overnight. And it's not just about pay, which of course is challenging for businesses which are also suffering from the cost of living crisis, but perhaps more creative things that can be done with benefits, with learning and development, but also looking at their brand and the purpose and values that they are able to demonstrate. And number 2, and very significantly, clients talking with us about upskilling their workforces and some of the successes that they've had in looking at skills gaps within the people that they've got already and identifying options for addressing those. Finally, and Lynn's specialist subject, sponsorship and looking further afield at, are there people outside the UK who might be able to help us fill some of these gaps? And clearly, Brexit had a significant impact on businesses and far fewer people coming from the European Union. But looking now and thinking, well, are we able to bring in the people that we need, perhaps from further afield as well? So inviting our experts to start talking through some of their experiences and what they're hearing. We've seen that a majority of British businesses are grappling with a skills shortage, whether it's a struggle to fill key roles or an inability to hang on to the right staff in the face of stiff competition. We've received some great questions from you, the audience, already, and please keep them coming by using the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. If we can kick off. So a first question, perhaps if I could put to Oliver, what do you see as driving the skills shortage?
Well, I think there's 3 points that jump to mind. I'm very conscious that Adam's got a lot to add to this as well. I know that he's on the coalface of this from a slightly different perspective than the lawyers. But so the 3 headline points that spring to mind are, firstly, we call it a skill shortage, but a mismatch of skill sets with what employers are seeking. So not so much people lacking skills, but people not having the right skills. And I think it's worth pointing out that this is not something that's unique to the United Kingdom. Just before I came on today, I was looking at a US Chamber of Commerce report, which suggests that the United States, which is sort of the ultimate free market economy, has a similar thing. So that the market itself isn't delivering to employers the range and the numbers of people with the correct skills that they need, or believe that they need. Second is really sort of demographics, which is linked to the pandemic as well. People choosing people leaving the workforce. Maybe some of them were accelerated the departure from the workforce during the pandemic. But just pure demographics, we're not, in common with most Western countries, we are not replacing with sufficient speed people leaving the workforce with people coming into the workforce. And that's going to be an issue for most developed Western countries and others, frankly, in the next few years. And thirdly, I know Brexit's toxic. You mentioned it already, but let's broaden it. It's just migration policy generally. Again, this is not unique to the UK. This is very much something that other countries are seeing as well, whereby politics makes it difficult to talk about migration policy. The reality is that an easy win, in theory, would be to hire in or to get in migrant labour. But throughout the Western world, that has become a difficult subject. And our politicians talk about getting skilled workers and getting the right people in. Now that ticks a lot of boxes, and that sounds quite good. But actually, I think, as we'll see, and maybe other panelists will discuss, do we actually need low skilled workers to fill lots of positions? I mean, is that actually where we're lacking? And then, for example, you have countries in the Middle East, like the Emirates, for example, that hire in migrant labour, but do so in a very different way to the UK and other European countries. So there's a lot of difficult politics around that. But migration policy is my sort of the third reason, which ties in with what I think Lynn's going to talk about. And just a final point, what stunned me about the sort of the survey is we kind of know all of this already, but it's just how wide-ranging and ubiquitous this is for employers in this country. It's a real problem. It's not going to get any better anytime soon. And I went onto the Home Office website for their list of job shortages, and I actually thought that was quite a narrow list, but it looks like a very big list to me. It looks like pretty much everyone's on there apart from lawyers. So yes, it's clearly a significant problem. Yeah,
very much so. Adam, any other thoughts on what's driving this skills shortage at the moment?
I think probably the other area that perhaps Oliver didn't mention was the pandemic and the changed ways of working that resulted from that, and perhaps opened up a new world of possibilities to lots of workers who now are perhaps slightly reluctant to go back to full-time, 5 days in the office, the commute, all those things, and the childcare issues that sort of come from that as well. So I think that has impacted the skills shortage. And then, yes, certainly from our business, we were fortunate enough historically to place lots of international candidates with our clients. London was a hugely attractive destination to come and work. It still is, but it's more difficult for those candidates now generally to come over unless they have the pre-settled or settled status. And so I think a lot of what we're seeing, the two, I suppose, short-term shocks have been Brexit and the pandemic, alongside the longer-term, perhaps, challenges around STEM subjects and the need for people to be studying maths longer, perhaps, as I know that the government's trying to do. So those are probably the key things from my perspective.
Thank you. And you mentioned the aspiration of people, perhaps taking a look at life and their work-life balance and not wanting to work full-time 5 days or 6 days a week in long hours. We've had a question on that subject from our audience, and they say the childcare recruitment industry is tough at the moment. I mean, I think it's been tough for a while, but particularly now. And a lot of people don't want to work full-time. Are you seeing this replicated in other sectors?
Yes, the short answer to that is yes. I'm not an expert at all on the childcare recruitment industry, but I think accessing affordable childcare is a huge issue for working parents across the UK. And therefore, the ability, I always think there's such a huge amount of talent there that people simply are not able to work on a full-time basis. And so, yes, we are seeing lots and lots of candidates looking for term time only or school hours or nursery hours only, job shares, part-time options. And I think that is increasingly prevalent, and I think it's a good thing. And I suppose one way to overcome the skills shortage is to look at all the things we'll talk about shortly in around becoming a better employer. But the other is to sort of really take it right back and look at all the tasks that a business needs to accomplish in its day, its week, its year, and work at is there a new way, a better way of doing that, accessing more flexible talent, job shares, shorter hours, to enable organizations to really tap into all the really hugely talented people who are struggling to commit to full-time work. I think that's a really important organizational challenge that a lot of firms perhaps haven't quite got their heads around or got to grips with just yet.
Okay. Interesting times we live in, and things are opening up in all sorts of ways. It's just, can employers keep up with those sorts of aspirations and balance all sorts of competing demands? To Oliver, I suppose, related to that question, we're aware of some changes in aspirations. What are you seeing in terms of things coming across your desks, in terms of what do people want, and what demands are employers grappling with at the moment?
Well, absolutely everything that Adam's just described. The realization that 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, it doesn't have to be the case. We can work around that. I don't think there's anyone from the London office of HCR on the call, but my biggest bugbear almost is the new way of working is fantastic, and we've got video calls and Zoom calls, but I'm finding that things are being massively compressed into what the Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday pattern, as I call it, with Mondays and Fridays being completely empty. Now, that's an aside, that's a bugbear of mine personally, but we're really seeing that with working in the City of London, whereby Mondays and Fridays are like weekends, and Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays are as busy as they ever were. But in terms of what we're seeing specifically as legal advisors, we're seeing employers having to deal with an expectation by their staff, driven by management to a large extent, and this isn't a bad thing, that there is complete flexibility around work, or a lot more flexibility compared to what there used to be. We used to have working hours and working days, and there was an expectation that people would broadly stick to that, even for senior people and professional services. Whereas now there is a real challenge for employers on the one hand to manage delivery of service to their clients and managing the expectations of their staff, that there is flexibility to sort of have work fit in around your lifestyle. Now, some employers are now pushing back slightly, looking to get people back into the office a bit more, looking to exercise a little bit more direction around working hours, and so that's creating some tensions. But it's not, as I said, it's broadly been seen as a good thing, and it's broadly been seen as something which it's a challenge rather than a problem. And if managed in the right way, to Adam's point, if businesses think about it and embrace it, then largely this is something which is very positive and can have positive outcomes. So that's one thing. We're seeing sort of in some cases employers grappling to sort of reassert the old order, but not to the same extent, but just sort of trying to calibrate it back a little bit. But we're also seeing requests for flexible working, more requests for flexible working, people working from home a lot more. Some businesses even having a home working full stop policy, so that they barely have people come to the office. And then the legal challenges are, well, how can we have a contract that says you work from home, but we'll get you to come in when we need you? And how does one manage that? How does one manage that from the legal perspective? Probably relatively easy from a legal perspective at a certain sort of headline point, but how do we actually manage that going forward? So if we say you work from home unless we want you in the office, and then we'll delegate that responsibility to our sort of various sub teams, that poses some interesting legal challenges and some practical commercial challenges. I'm seeing quite a bit of that as well.
Thank you. I mean, interestingly, you talk about employers wanting to assert the old order and certain very well-known commentators have talked about, we want to get people back into the office, and some famous people leaving memos on the desks of civil servants, which is, an interesting approach. Adam, in terms of the old order, what are you seeing in terms of different generational attitudes to the whole issue of flexible working and remote hybrids coming back to the office?
Yes, it's fascinating. I think I suppose generationally, I do think some of these issues are tied to sort of life stage. I think perhaps people who perhaps older, more experienced, may, I think, quite like the opportunity to come into the office sometimes, but not all the time. I think for working parents, as we've discussed, it's probably harder to commit to the full-time working in the office, and then for newer entrants to work. I think it's a balance, actually. Some are keen on some flexibility for sure, but equally there is a learning and development challenge, I think, with when you are fully remote or hybrid. It doesn't mean it's impossible, but it's harder to achieve, arguably. And so what we're seeing from a number of clients are that actually that they're struggling to get the manager levels back into the office frequently enough to really help with the training and development of the more junior people who are actually quite willing to come in and quite certainly, I apologise for a London skew on this, but the younger members of the team want to be in London quite a bit, but the manager's probably less so. And so if your manager's not there, it's sort of that sort of goes against the whole piece. There's also a sector element to this. I think financial services have definitely been leading the charge back to the office in London. Whereas tech firms, obviously, probably at the other end of the scale, and given the nature of what they do, working much more flexibly. Our own business here is we work on a hybrid basis, and that's worked pretty well for us. But it's still an enormous challenge for hybrid businesses to get the balance right, to get the culture, the training and development, just to really maximize one's time outside the office and then in the office together. The challenge is sometimes you come into the office and spend all day on calls like this, and actually everyone's outside, and so you think, well, actually that wasn't really worth the commute. So that again is a challenge. So lots, and I think we're all still grappling with a lot of these issues, but there's a real sector and a generational distinctions to be made, I think.
Thank you.
I could just add to what Adam said there. I think it's very interesting because I think one of the things that I thought we would see post-pandemic is, as an employment lawyer, I'm sort of naturally reluctant to use words like junior and young, etc. But I'll do so for the purpose of this call. I thought we'd see a lot of younger people flooding back into the offices, having been locked up in small flats, certainly in London, in pokey small flats, in flat shares. And to my surprise, we haven't seen that. We've to Adam's point, we've seen across the board. I think we've seen people coming in for a limited amount of time. Maybe it's a snowball effect. Maybe when managers aren't coming in, other people don't want to come in, or younger people don't want to come in and spend money on a commute if their friends aren't coming in as well. So what I thought would happen, which is more senior people with maybe longer commutes, living further out, coming in on fewer days than the more junior people, hasn't actually happened. In fact, what we've got is everyone coming in, generally, with one or two exceptions, on fewer occasions. And so we do have this very interesting perspective. Certainly in London, if you come here on a Monday or a Friday, you might as well be a Sunday. Certainly on a Friday feels like a Sunday. And that's very acute. That's something I've really noticed post-pandemic. That was never the case beforehand. And that's a really interesting thing that's happened. And I'd be interested to see how that plays itself out.
I think it is interesting. And I think to me, it's bound up with all of the questions about what can we do as employers to make ourselves attractive to candidates and particularly younger people coming through. And that leads us on to another question. And perhaps, Adam, I can ask you again, thinking about how to be an employer of choice, how can we best link the employer value proposition and brand and develop the organisation's values and behaviours around hybrid working and anything else, to reflect the changes that we've seen and attract the right people to fill skills shortages and keep hold of the ones we've already got and don't want to lose?
Gosh, that is a question. Look, I think it's a good thing, first and foremost, that all parts of the workforce are having increasingly high expectations of firms. I think that's good. I think that helps us all get better and become better businesses, and work harder, or right across the board, from providing meaningful work and having a set of values as an organisation that we stick to, and that we continue to sort of aspire to deliver and achieve. I think as leaders, to be authentic and to really believe in the work we do and the values we set. But then there are a whole host of other things. We've got to get the training and development structures, particularly for the newer joiners to the workforce. I think that's something we really see is okay, what's the pathway here? How is my learning and development and my career progression going to be achieved in an organisation, and how will I, as an individual, be supported in that journey? I think reward and benefits, again, look, it's never the only thing, but it is important, particularly in a cost of living crisis, that we do stay competitive as an organisation. Then there's the flexibility piece, and getting that balance, if indeed it is a balance, getting that right, so that we still feel as an organisation that we have a strong culture, that people know their colleagues like them, enjoy spending time with them and learning with them in an office environment, but also that we get our home setups right, so that those days at home still feel like profitable, valuable days for individuals. They're still meeting colleagues, they're still able to function really well. So it's really tough, I think, for employers to get that balance right. But equally, if we don't, then a number of things will happen. We will find it hard to attract the right level of talent we need into our organisations. And then, as you sort of touch upon, good people will not stay in organisations where they don't feel that they're being offered meaningful work, opportunity for career advancement, good training structures, and perhaps a values-driven organisation that they really feel comfortable with and matches their own values. So lots for us all to do, but I think it's a good thing. It will make us all better businesses, and hopefully overall that will help the economy.
Okay, thank you. And perhaps taking it to a different perspective. And Lynn, can I ask you about opening up recruitment to overseas? And it seems that there is a supply of overseas workers who are willing to come to the UK. Thank you for a question from the audience this morning. What are the biggest hurdles that employers face, and why aren't more employers in the UK looking to fill their current gaps with people from overseas?
It's a very good question. I think in terms of the biggest hurdles, it's certainly, although there's plenty of visa routes available to bring people to the UK, some which involve sponsorship, some which don't, which a lot of people don't realise. It's not all about sponsorship. There's plenty of visa routes that don't need that, and obviously there's lots of clients that do deal with the non-sponsorship route as well. But I think the biggest hurdle is eligibility rules around the different visa options. Different visas have got different eligibility requirements. It's knowing which is the best route for your particular circumstances. And it's also the cost of the process. So if you're looking at the sponsorship route, the employer needs to apply for a sponsor license, which is a relative. It's the actual sponsor license itself isn't particularly expensive, but it's the visa then that's added onto that, and the immigration skills charge, which I know the questions also covered in the Q&A, which I'll come on to in a sec. And it's the timing factor as well. I mean, I think a lot of the time, recruiters have got a desperate need to fill a skills shortage gap. And when you then look at the time it takes for the UKVI to make a decision on visa applications, that can be not very practical, and get a lot of clients saying, I need them to start ASAP. I don't think a lot of employers have realised that although perhaps the UKVO website will suggest it's going to take 8 weeks for a decision on this, or longer sometimes, there are ways to expedite the process that we can help with along the way. So there's ways to expedite the sponsor license application process. There's ways to expedite the visa application for the individuals. So certainly, the earlier, in a wonderful world, we would all be looking at these things with 3-6 months, in the future. It doesn't always work like that. So we can certainly look at what are the visa routes available, what's the best one for the organisation, taking into account time constraints, and what ways can we help to expedite the process in terms of making certain applications to the Home Office. The added bit of that question, I think, in the Q&A was, are we looking at the immigration skills charge disappearing, or will the government take that away? I can't answer for them. I think it's highly unlikely, in my view. It's a way of them making money so it's a massive consideration for employers when they're looking at taking on individuals from outside the UK. They do have to take into account that charge, which, yes, for a 5-year visa, it's a decent amount of money, but I can't see that disappearing anytime soon.
No, but I am delighted that you're able to work magic and you have ways of expediting applications. That is a piece of good news. Okay, so I mean we've looked at where might you bring candidates from, whether it's overseas or in the UK. I'm thinking particularly you, Adam, about any recruitment tips. We've had a member of the audience today telling us that they're using every agency out there. They're advertising on their own website. They're using all of the tools that LinkedIn has available, but still struggling. What top tips might you have for helping to fill those difficult roles?
Again, the big question. I think looking at the roles themselves, I think, again, just making sure you've got real clarity on the role and the pathway for roles where they could lead to if an individual comes in and really excels over the first year, 2-3 years of that role. You mentioned the tools. I think, again, that there is the challenge is, again, the more you spend on all this, perhaps the more visibility you get. So it can become expensive with LinkedIn or other online tools. But if you're smart about it, you can really sort of boost your profile if you use those tools properly. So I think that's definitely part of it. I would say on the recruitment agencies point, and you can take this with a pinch of salt or not, but I think that there is a feeling that we'll throw out roles to lots of agencies and hope that a couple sort of deliver. The challenge back to that, I would say, is if you, just to be aware, if you give a role, let's say, to 10 agencies, in effect, you're giving them each sort of 10% of your time. The agencies will know that, and probably they will then give 10% of their effort to those 10% sort of commitments. And so you've got sort of 10% times 10%, you haven't got a great chance of filling. So I would say, in general terms, I would recommend partnering with a small number of good agencies that you know well, that you can trust, that will really get a good feel for your business, for the types of candidates that will add to your culture, the skill sets you need, and really build up a trust and work together. So if you can work in partnerships with a small number of agencies, I do feel that way you will have a far better chance of hiring in some really good talent via that route. If you really spread it wide, you're really then just sort of relying a little bit on chance to be successful. And then final point would be trying to look at it in the whole and say, okay, here are the tasks we need to deliver. Are there ways we can slice and dice this a little bit differently? Can we access working parents and offer them different contracts to fit in with their schedules? Can we look at job shares? Can we embrace part-time workers? And suddenly, if there are certain, I realize that different sectors and different firms obviously have different abilities to do that. But I do think there's a huge amount of talent out there that's not currently being given opportunities that really we need to do a better job of tapping into.
Can I just add on to Adam's points? from an immigration point of view is don't discount applicants who are already in the UK on visas or be put off looking outside the UK to fill recruitment needs. I know I've just talked about costs and timings, but and I think some clients have shied away from looking at people on visas because I think just don't understand, what it means to recruit somebody on a visa and how. But actually, there are some really useful visas out there that don't need sponsorship. For example, students can go on to a graduate visa for 2 years, and it's a relatively straightforward process to go through. And I think people sometimes forget that. So there are, it's not a route to discount or ignore or be put off looking at. But yeah, as with anything, the earlier that we can that they look at that and can obtain advice, the better.
Great, thank you, Lynn. And I going back to the question of what can we do to make these roles as attractive as possible. And Adam, how do you think this might be linked to the concept of the everywhere office, which I know is something that you're very interested in?
Yes, we ourselves and a number of clients now are looking at, as I say, how tasks can be done and the fact that they can access talent internationally or elsewhere that can work on perhaps a more flexible basis from a remote perspective and literally work from anywhere. We have some nomadic consultants in our business who literally work from all around the world, travel around the world. They've got their laptop, they've got their skill set, and they're able to work for a number of organizations on a remote basis, sort of flexibly on a project basis to deliver work when required to help companies overcome spikes in demand in a flexible way. So I think the idea of the everywhere office is very much, again, to access the skill sets we need as the priority of a search, and then figure out the logistics and the contractuals and things like that can normally be worked out in a compliant way. And so I think it is just looking at problems in the broadest context around skills and talent. And if you happen to access a consultant in a different geography who's able to work remotely to a high standard, then that can be a great option for lots of businesses, particularly for urgent project requirements.
Okay, great. And as lawyers, we love a bit of compliance, don't we, Oliver? So, I mean, just thinking about those regulatory side of things and tax, perhaps, just to name a couple. What sorts of questions are coming to you, Oliver, from clients who are interested in this idea of the everywhere office?
Well, there's you know me too well, Catherine, when you said that about compliance. The interesting, so to Adam's point, so we see a lot of employers looking at filling short-term gaps through the use of temporary resource, so consultancy agreements. And we see some employers really embracing the everywhere office in the way that Adam's described it. But of course, there are some that also are aware of the risks around potentially having a tax establishment in another country and not having access in a sort of physical sense. Although, as we've just discussed, we're all lacking that kind of physical contact compared with pre-pandemic times. But there's a sort of a psychological barrier sometimes to having a key part of the team not in England or frankly possibly sort of at the other end of the world. So there are those things that they grapple with. But as Adam quite correctly said, the way in which to approach this is to really take a real sort of broader view, look at all the options. It's horses for courses. There's certain projects where you've got fixed deliverables, depending on the urgency, depending on the industry, where the everywhere office, the nomads, the consultancy agreements, lends itself well to an employer's problem. So you don't necessarily have to be looking to recruit a full-time employee. So just thinking about it, looking at it in the round, really partnering with your advisors, looking internally at your HR function. Just taking a step back and, as Adam said, how you slice it, how you dice it might be just give you a different perspective. And on that point, one of the things that I just wonder sometimes is whether, and this is really one for Adam, I guess, just to sort of bat another question in his way, is to to what extent are employers pigeonholing roles for their own purposes in a way which leads them to conclude that they don't necessarily have the right skill sets and the right people coming through. And I'll just give you an example of that. And in my own view, I would expect someone with a, in a sort of I would a job which has a sort of a tech wraparound to be one for people with STEM, that's science, technology, engineering, and maths type backgrounds. But maybe that's not correct. Maybe that's actually wrong. I'll give an example. We as lawyers, many of us will have law backgrounds, but actually some of the best lawyers in this country, famous lawyers in the country that we studied when we were at university were non-lawyers, people with other backgrounds. So I do wonder to what extent we have employers need to sort of rethink in the round what the skills shortage is, and think about whether they can actually train up. If you have someone with a sort of a very basic background level of skill, higher education or vocational, whatever it might be, to what extent do we as employers then train people up? They might not come as a finished product, but actually they've got sort of the foundation skills, and we just sort of build them up. I don't know if that's something that you've come across, Adam, with your business and your clients.
Absolutely. I think reskilling, we haven't really talked about too much, but reskilling your existing talent pool and workforce is definitely part of the answer here, I think. It requires a strategy. It doesn't happen overnight. So it's a long-term investment to get that right. But absolutely, I think organizations where they are able to move workers into areas of higher demand through reskilling, I think that is absolutely something to be really, really important for businesses. But as I say, it needs to be very much attached to a long-term talent strategy and a real investment made in those individuals. The other thing is on the recruitment side, again, just looking at recruitment perhaps more broadly. Historically, we've been tied to a lot of very strict academic criteria often for recruitment, and moving that to more of a skills-based recruitment, again, can open up talent pools that may not previously have been considered. So I think both of those are options for us all as we look to address the shortages.
Great, thank you, Adam. And I'm going back to the question of skills and training and what in this country we are looking at, and clearly lots of employers are taking the initiative and looking at how can we train our existing staff. I think to take it a bit more widely, a few days ago, the government's own technical and apprenticeships body launched its plans for a simpler skills system. And it says it's going to use big data to identify where change is needed to support the economy and streamline the way that it works with employers. We've struggled in this country for decades with getting technical education right. And I know my clients in FE colleges, not only dealing with funding issues, but there's a whole debate to be had about how we regard technical education, let alone fund it and use it correctly. So all of these things sound fantastic. And in terms of the sorts of partnerships that we see between the really good education providers and employers, what sorts of successes have you seen, Adam?
Well, I think the rise in apprenticeships over the last few years, and probably in conjunction with the apprenticeship levy, has been really positive, and we're really now starting to see the first results of that. One of our clients, a large consulting firm, I saw the other day that one of their first apprentices has actually achieved partner level now. So that's, I think, over something like a 12-year period, which is a wonderful example of what can be done. And that was a school leaver sort of at 18, choosing perhaps not to go to the conventional university route, but to go and join a firm at that apprenticeship stage. In this case, she worked her way up all the way through to partner. And I do think those apprenticeship schemes offer a really exciting option for firms. But again, they require an awful lot of organization, and to get those right is a massive undertaking. But I think certainly probably for larger businesses, I do think that's a very a fruitful way to sort of get access to early career talent and really help those people develop quickly, and also build a huge loyalty to the organisation as well, and hopefully that way increase retention and things like that. So apprenticeships definitely. One thing, again, it's probably too big a topic for now, is the impact of AI on all this, and how perhaps AI may actually start to be able to accomplish some of those technical disciplines for us. And perhaps then it will be the more creative thinkers that we actually need to be thinking about hiring again, as the AI takes up more of the technical challenge. But probably we'll have to wait and see a little bit on that one.
Yeah, the whole session in itself. And
Yes.
perhaps we can have a final question to Lynn. Could you tell us a little bit about the recent news of the introduction of the ETA, the electronic travel authorization, and will it affect regular visa processing? Do you think it's going to create backlogs? And are people going to be looked at who are coming here on holiday as potential people who are trying to get in to take jobs?
Again, it's another really good question. For those that don't know, the electronic travel authorization, it's a new system that's being introduced, which will require all visa exempt foreign nationals who usually will be able to turn up at a border or at an airport or a ferry terminal just with their passport to get in for up to 6 months at a time. They're going to need to obtain permission in advance now to travel to the UK. It's going to work in a very similar way for those that have travelled to America under the ESTA system. It's going to be a fairly quick online application. Decisions are said to be provided within 3 working days, but the electronic travel authorization will last for 2 years. It's not a visa. It doesn't guarantee entry into the UK. It's a pre-travel authorization system. It's going to be introduced in stages. It's going to start November this year with Qatar nationals, to extending to other Middle Eastern countries in February into 2024. But the intention is that it's going to be fully operational by the end of 2024. So still a bit of time yet, but given the relatively straightforward information that's being asked on the applications, it has been suggested that those applications are going to be processed automatically, with only the more complex decisions being made by the ETA officials. It therefore shouldn't, I'm going to say that shouldn't in inverted commas, impact on regular visa processing decisions. But we're talking about the UKVI here. Please don't quote me. And I think with any new system, there's a bedding in period. So I dare say there's going to be some delays, but UKVI generally are very good at diverting resources to areas where there are bottlenecks. So, for example, the current backlog on visa applications, which I think people are thinking about when they're asking this question, was mainly due to the war in Ukraine, which was obviously the impact was huge on the system and very unexpected. So they were having to respond very quickly, which caused the current backlog.
Okay.
I don't think the UKVI are looking at it to look out for people coming to work in the UK. The new system was introduced mainly as, 2 reasons: security measure in the continued effort to tighten control of UK borders. It was a massive part of Brexit negotiations that we tighten up our borders and reduce net migration, but also to increase the ability to track these non-visa nationals that can come in just on the back of a passport, and hopefully trying to keep track on people who might overstay and potentially stay here and work in breach of that right.
Okay, thank you, Lynn. Well, that's really helpful clarification, and obviously you're the person to come to talk about coming through legal routes, whether that's a visa itself or whether an employer needs to become a sponsor. So I think that's all we have time for. Thank you very much to our panel, and thank you to the audience for thought-provoking questions. If you've got other thoughts or burning questions on training, recruitment, sponsorship and immigration, please do get in touch with us. A recording of this session will be available shortly on the HCR website so that you can share with your colleagues. And I'd like to close by wishing everyone great success with plugging their skills gaps. Thank you very much.